Cartoons from the 1970s weren't all peace signs and disco lights. Some of them pushed so hard against the limits of children's TV that they left parents fuming, censors scrambling, and kids either terrified or totally confused. Ever wonder why certain Saturday morning shows just vanished without explanation? Or why some storylines felt more like late-night thrillers than kid-friendly fun? Buckle up, because we're diving into the plots that went so far. Even the networks couldn't handle them. The New Adventures of Batman, 1977, bite-sized. Batman cartoons usually meant campy fun, cheesy villains, and gadgets kids could dream about. But in one infamous episode called Bite-Sized, things got disturbingly strange. The villain, a mad scientist with the creativity of a bad fever dream, shrinks Gotham's citizens down to toy size. Imagine children watching characters scream in terror as they're scooped up, trapped in jars, and displayed like collectibles. For kids used to Scooby-Doo mysteries, this was the stuff of nightmares. The imagery of humans screaming while doll-sized left many parents writing angry letters. Was this supposed to be a Saturday morning adventure, or a horror flick in disguise? Critics argued that the show blurred the line between campy action and body horror. Some TV affiliates even trimmed scenes because the idea of people being manhandled like insects was just too unsettling. It didn't help that the pacing made it worse. There weren't any silly jokes or quick resolutions. Instead, whole scenes lingered on Batman and Robin, frantically chasing down miniature citizens in glass cases. The fear felt drawn out, which was unusual for a kid's cartoon of the time. It was like the writers forgot who the target audience was. The episode became legendary for the wrong reasons. Batman survived as a franchise, of course, but Bite-Sized is remembered as the moment the show took itself way too seriously and creeped out the very kids it was meant to entertain. If you ask some fans, it was the closest Batman ever came to starring in a Saturday morning horror show. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, 1972, Gang Wars. Fat Albert was supposed to be wholesome, with a message in every episode, but in 1972, one storyline went off the rails. In Gang Wars, Albert and his friends get caught in the middle of a neighborhood turf battle. We're not talking slapstick fights or pie throwing. We're talking knives, switchblades, and the looming threat of serious violence, all on a Saturday morning cartoon. The episode tackled real issues. Kids were shown how gangs lure teens in, with promises of belonging and protection. But the delivery was intense. Entire scenes played out with characters cornered in alleyways, tension hanging in the air. One rival gang member even threatened to teach them a lesson in a way that felt dangerously close to something ripped from the evening news. Parents lost it. They argued this wasn't an after-school special. It was supposed to be entertainment. Why were their kids suddenly getting a crash course in street violence before breakfast? Networks defended the show, saying it was educational, but the complaints piled up. Some stations refused to rerun the episode at all. In hindsight, it was bold for a cartoon to confront such heavy subject matter. But bold doesn't always mean right. For many children, this was the first time they saw gang culture presented on screen, and it was frighteningly real. Instead of teaching lessons about kindness or cooperation, it felt like the cartoon dragged its young audience straight into the middle of a turf war. Too far? Absolutely. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? 1970. Bedlam in the Big Top. Scooby-Doo usually meant silly ghosts in costumes and harmless scares, but Bedlam in the Big Top crossed a line even die-hard fans admit was disturbing. The episode featured a hypnotist villain dressed as a clown who terrorized an abandoned circus. The clown's eerie laugh, his spiraling eyes, and his power to control people's minds pushed this way past campy mystery into nightmare fuel. Kids weren't prepared for it. Clowns were supposed to be goofy and harmless, but this one turned them into robotic puppets against their will. Imagine sitting down with your cereal, only to watch Daphne or Fred suddenly march like zombies under the control of a sinister clown. Parents quickly labeled the episode psychologically damaging, with some kids reporting nightmares for weeks. Even animation critics years later point out how different the tone felt. The atmosphere was darker, the music more ominous, and the fear more real. Instead of just unmasking a greedy businessman at the end, the gang faced something that felt like it could truly mess with your mind. The plot leaned more into psychological horror than kid-friendly comedy. It became infamous in Scooby-Doo history. Networks hesitated to rerun it, and some DVD collections even debated including it. While Scooby-Doo thrived on harmless frights, Bedlam in the Big Top proved that sometimes the line between spooky fun and genuine terror can be crossed in just 20 minutes. To this day, many fans call it one of the scariest cartoons ever aired on Saturday mornings. The Jackson 5, 1971, Rasho Jackson. On paper, the Jackson 5 cartoon was harmless fun, a way to cash in on the group's fame by following them on colorful adventures. But the episode Rasho Jackson revealed how quickly that formula could go sideways. The plot was a bizarre parody of Japanese culture, with psychedelic backdrops, over-the-top stereotypes, and visuals that left even fans scratching their heads. The story had the Jackson brothers traveling overseas and encountering a rival band in a surreal showdown inspired by Japanese theater. Sounds artsy, right? In practice, it turned into a chaotic mess of exaggerated accents, samurai gags, and trippy visuals that felt more like a strange acid trip than a kid's show. Parents complained about how confusing and borderline offensive the cultural portrayals were. Even kids were baffled. Instead of the usual upbeat musical numbers, the episode leaned on surreal imagery, glowing dragons, distorted masks, and shifting colors that made little sense. While the intention might have been to introduce children to another culture, the execution came off like parody, clumsy and cringeworthy. The backlash wasn't immediate, but over time, critics pointed to Rasho Jackson as one of the clearest examples of how 70s cartoons often mishandled cultural themes. What was meant to be cool and global, instead, looked like a mix of stereotypes packaged in wild, confusing animation. Looking back, the Jackson 5 cartoon had a charm all its own, but Rasho Jackson pushed it past harmless fun and straight into the "what were they thinking" category. It's proof that not every psychedelic experiment belonged in Saturday morning animation. Super Friends, 1973. Too Hot to Handle. Super Friends was supposed to be pure heroics. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman, saving the day with colorful action and simple morals. But the episode Too Hot to Handle cranked the stakes up way too high for Saturday morning. The villain in this one wasn't just robbing banks or stealing jewels. He was threatening to alter Earth's climate, creating deadly heat waves and global disasters. The imagery wasn't subtle. Cities cooked under blazing suns, ice caps melted into nothing, and people collapsed from heat exhaustion. The cartoon's message about the environment was well-intentioned, but it landed with the subtlety of a hammer. Instead of a light adventure, kids were suddenly watching an apocalyptic nightmare unfold before their eyes. Parents were shocked. Letters poured in accusing the show of scaring children with doomsday scenarios. Some educators defended it as raising awareness, but critics said it was a frightening way to do it. Remember, this was the 1970s when kids were already hearing about an energy crisis and pollution on the news. Seeing their favorite heroes nearly fail to stop planetary destruction hit a little too close to home. The backlash didn't kill the Super Friends, but it did set a precedent. Networks started watching plots more carefully, worried about storylines that felt too catastrophic for young viewers. To this day, fans remember Too Hot to Handle not as a fun adventure, but as the moment Saturday morning superheroes got uncomfortably real. Josie and the Pussycats in Outer Space, 1972, Alien Time Warp. Josie and the Pussycats were known for fun, music-filled adventures. But when the gang got blasted into space, the show took a turn for the weird, and nowhere was it weirder than the episode Alien Time Warp. Instead of solving a mystery or rocking out, the characters got trapped in a bizarre time loop where nothing made sense. The episode had Josie and her bandmates reliving events over and over, each loop more distorted than the last. Scenes repeated with slight changes, characters speaking backward, colors flashing oddly, or entire sets morphing into surreal shapes. It was less a light-hearted cartoon, and more like something out of an experimental student film. Kids were baffled. Parents complained that the episode was confusing and even frightening. Some said their children cried because they thought the characters were doomed to be stuck forever. The usual lighthearted music numbers couldn't save it either. Imagine singing through a nightmare where time keeps collapsing on itself. Critics later noted how the episode mirrored psychedelic storytelling trends of the 1970s. But for a Saturday morning show aimed at children, it was a major misstep. Instead of zany fun, alien time warp felt like a fever dream that never ended. It's remembered today as one of the strangest and most unsettling episodes of the Josie spin-off, proof that sometimes experimental doesn't mean entertaining. Sealab 2020, 1972. Deep Threat. Sealab 2020 was pitched as an educational, adventure cartoon set under the sea, teaching kids about ocean science and teamwork. But the episode Deep Threat dove way too far into darkness. The plot involved eco-saboteurs attacking the lab, with whole sequences showing flooding, characters nearly drowning, and the threat of the entire station collapsing into the ocean floor. The tone was tense, almost claustrophobic. Entire scenes lingered on corridors filling with water and characters gasping for breath. It was more like a disaster movie than a kid's cartoon. And while the show tried to end with a message about protecting the environment, the journey there terrified young audiences. Parents called the imagery too intense, especially for kids who couldn't swim. The educational networks that backed the show insisted it was about raising awareness of ocean dangers, but audiences weren't convinced. One TV critic even said Sealab was the scariest cartoon on the air because its threats felt grounded in real-life disasters. The fallout was swift. Sealab 2020 only lasted one season, and Deep Threat became its most infamous episode. For many kids, it wasn't a lesson in ocean science. It was their first brush with panic-inducing imagery that felt far too real. The Addams Family, 1973. The Mardi Gras Story. When Hanna-Barbera adapted the Addams Family into a cartoon, most expected kooky fun. But in The Mardi Gras Story, the writers leaned too hard into the creepy side and stirred up backlash. The plot followed the Addamses to New Orleans, where they got caught up in a carnival full of strange rituals, eerie masks, and dolls that looked like voodoo charms. For kids, it was jarring. Scenes of characters poking pins into dolls and chanting struck parents as disturbing rather than funny. Complaints rolled in that the show was glamorizing dark practices for children. In reality, the episode was just trying to be playful with Mardi Gras themes, but the imagery crossed into territory that felt too sinister. The strangest part was how casually the Addams family treated it all. Gomez and Morticia laughed while creepy puppets seemed to come to life, and Wednesday proudly waved around a doll that looked far too much like a human figure in distress. Instead of the usual spooky but silly gags, this episode felt genuinely unsettling. Critics later argued it was an example of the writers forgetting their audience. Adults might have seen it as parody, but kids saw something far darker. The Mardi Gras Story remains one of the strangest relics of the Addams Family cartoon, a reminder that even a spooky comedy can go too far when the balance tips from kooky to genuinely creepy. Star Trek. The Animated Series, 1973. The Magics of Megas 2. Star Trek's animated spin-off often leaned into wild sci-fi ideas, but the Magics of Megas 2 pushed straight past the line. In this story, the crew of the Enterprise encounters an alien who resembles a horned sorcerer. The plot revealed he'd once visited Earth and been rejected as a misunderstood outsider, leaving audiences with a clear impression that the cartoon was rewriting human history to make room for a powerful being who looked like pure evil. For kids tuning in, the imagery was overwhelming. The Enterprise crew battled illusions of fire, lightning, and cosmic destruction, while the so-called sorcerer toyed with them like playthings. The psychedelic visuals made the story even stranger, with starfields swirling into kaleidoscopes and characters screaming as their bodies warped under alien power. Parents hated it. Many said it was inappropriate to expose children to a storyline that leaned so heavily on fear, trickery, and otherworldly manipulation. Critics accused the writers of sneaking in material better suited for adult science fiction. The backlash didn't end the show, but it became a touchstone for how far the series was willing to go. Fans today call it bold, even experimental. But for the kids who saw it in the 1970s, the magics of Megas 2 wasn't just confusing, it was terrifying. And that was never supposed to be the point of Saturday morning cartoons. Groovy Ghoulies, 1970. Dracula's Family Reunion. Groovy Ghoulies was marketed as a silly monster comedy, a sort of Saturday morning monster mash with puns and songs. But the episode Dracula's Family Reunion pushed things a little too far into the creepy. The setup was simple. Dracula invites his extended family of ghouls, witches, and goblins for a reunion. The result? A half-hour filled with grim jokes about coffins, decaying relatives, and resurrection gags that played more like dark comedy than kids' fun. What really rattled viewers was the casual tone. One scene showed relatives joking about climbing out of graves for the party. Another gag involved relatives swapping heads at the dinner table, with characters laughing like it was the funniest thing ever. For children, this was less comedy and more nightmare fuel. Parents weren't amused. They wrote in calling the episode tasteless, worried that kids were being exposed to disturbing images packaged as humor. Some stations quietly skipped the rerun, and Groovy Ghoulies gained a reputation for being a little too gleeful with macabre jokes. Ironically, the episode has since become a cult favorite among horror fans, who see it as a rare moment when children's TV flirted openly with dark comedy. But at the time, Dracula's Family Reunion was a sharp reminder that not every gag belongs in a Saturday morning cartoon. What was meant as silly monster fun ended up as one of the strangest, most unsettling cartoon plots of the decade. Schoolhouse Rock, 1973. Three-ring government. Schoolhouse Rock was supposed to be the gold standard for educational fun. Short, catchy songs that made learning cool. But one particular short, Three-Ring Government, raised eyebrows. For going way beyond what parents expected from a 2-minute cartoon lesson. The cartoon compared the 3 branches of government to a circus act. Sounds playful enough. But the way it was presented, complete with clowns, strong men, and ringmasters, struck some adults as too cynical. Instead of teaching about checks and balances in a neutral way, it looked like a parody. Critics argued it made the government seem incompetent, even dangerous. The backlash was swift. Some educators loved it, praising the honesty of comparing politics to chaos. But parents and politicians complained loudly that children were being fed an anti-authority message at an impressionable age. Certain schools even refused to use that short when they screened Schoolhouse Rock, episodes in classrooms. The controversy didn't sink the series, but it left a lasting mark. Three-Ring Government was one of the first times a simple educational cartoon was accused of being too political. Today it's remembered as a bold experiment that rattled people in the 70s, proof that even a cartoon jingle could spark heated debate. Speed Buggy, 1973, Out of Sight. Speed Buggy was essentially Scooby-Doo with a talking dune buggy, light-hearted chases, colorful villains, and goofy gadgets. But in the episode Out of Sight, things spiraled into dangerous territory. The plot revolved around a villain using an invisibility gas to commit crimes, and naturally, Speed Buggy and the gang got caught in the crossfire. Sounds harmless until kids started imitating it at home. The gas was shown as a simple chemical mix that turned people invisible in seconds. Curious children tried to recreate it, mixing household cleaners in basements and garages. Reports of kids experimenting with Speed Buggy science spread quickly. Parents and teachers panicked. Letters flooded in warning that the show was encouraging reckless behavior. ABC insisted it was fantasy, but the damage was done. Schools even sent notes home telling parents to discourage their kids from Speed Buggy experiments. The episode itself wasn't malicious, but it highlighted how easy it was for children to take cartoon science literally. Instead of inspiring imagination, Out of Sight inspired unsafe experiments. It's remembered as one of those cartoon plots where the writers didn't think through the consequences, and it landed them on the wrong side of public opinion. Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, 1976. Tarzan and the Graveyard of the Elephants. Tarzan cartoons were already edgier than most, filled with jungle battles and real danger. But Tarzan and the Graveyard of the Elephants was a different beast entirely. The story took Tarzan into a legendary elephant graveyard, a place where herds supposedly went to die. Instead of adventure, kids got a surprisingly grim meditation on death and loss. The visuals were haunting: piles of elephant bones, dying animals staggering through the jungle, and poachers lurking to steal tusks. For adults, it may have carried a conservation message, but for children, it was deeply unsettling. Parents reported kids crying after watching it, disturbed by the realistic depiction of animal death. Censors debated whether the episode was too heavy for children's television. Some stations reran it, others quietly shelved it. In the end, it stood out as one of the boldest but bleakest Tarzan episodes ever produced. Instead of excitement, it delivered melancholy. Instead of fun, it left kids grappling with themes they weren't ready for. It's a textbook case of good intentions, highlighting the impact of poaching and the fragility of wildlife, clashing with the expectations of Saturday morning audiences. Tarzan was no stranger to danger, but this episode proved that even cartoons about jungle heroes could go far darker than anyone expected. The New Adventures of Gilligan, 1974. Gilligan's Army. The live-action Gilligan's Island was goofy escapism. The cartoon spin-off tried to capture the same tone, but Gilligan's Army stumbled into controversy. In this episode, Gilligan is hypnotized into believing he's a military commander, leading an army made up of his fellow castaways and island animals. What started as a slapstick gag turned strange fast. Gilligan barked orders, drilled animals like soldiers, and even staged mock battles on the island. The humor was meant to come from Gilligan's incompetence, but the militaristic imagery rubbed people the wrong way. With the Vietnam War fresh in memory, many parents saw the episode as an uncomfortable parody of real conflict. Letters poured in, accusing the show of being insensitive. Some argued it trivialized the trauma of war by turning it into a silly gag. Others felt the hypnosis angle made the whole thing too sinister for kids, showing characters manipulated into fighting without consent. Ultimately, Gilligan's Army became infamous as an episode that misunderstood its own tone. The writers thought they were being silly, but audiences saw something much darker. It's a reminder that even the most lighthearted properties can wander into territory they never should have touched. Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, 1972. The Neighbors. Before The Simpsons, before Family Guy, there was Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, a primetime animated sitcom that didn't shy away from controversy. One episode, simply titled The Neighbors, stunned audiences by diving straight into issues most live-action sitcoms barely touched, let alone a cartoon. The plot revolved around the Henderson family's new neighbors, who quickly became the target of gossip and paranoia. Through sly humor, the story touched on discrimination, paranoia about outsiders, and even generational clashes over culture. What started as lighthearted bickering spiraled into accusations, angry confrontations, and outright hostility between families. Viewers weren't ready. Saturday morning cartoons were goofy, colorful escapes. But this primetime cartoon was suddenly acting like a mirror, reflecting the ugliest parts of suburban life. Some critics praised it for daring to tackle real life, but parents who tuned in with kids expecting silly jokes were furious. The most shocking part was the tone. The show didn't resolve neatly with hugs or lessons. Instead, it left audiences sitting with discomfort. For many, it felt more like biting social satire than entertainment. And that was the problem. The networks wanted to cash in on the popularity of adult-themed cartoons, but this episode showed just how fast a family-friendly format could spiral into uncomfortable territory. In retrospect, The Neighbors was ahead of its time, paving the way for animated sitcoms to handle edgy topics. But back in the 70s, people weren't laughing, they were writing complaints. Too far? For that audience, definitely. So, there you have it. 15 cartoon plots from the 1970s that went way past the line. From apocalyptic disasters to nightmare clowns, from heavy-handed social commentary to downright confusing fever dreams, these episodes proved that Saturday morning wasn't always safe. Which of these wild plots shocked you the most? Did you see any of them as a kid and wonder if you imagined it? Drop your stories in the comments, hit subscribe, and join us next time for more deep dives into animation's strangest moments.